Hello and welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're going to be taking a look at my Maytag Bravos XL washing machine. If you can possibly see on the floor right in here, there is some brown splatter that's coming out the bottom. I've pushed this back to kind of make it a little more obvious where it is. Hopefully you can see that there on the screen. And lately it's been sounding a lot more like I live near an international airport with 747s taking off every time the washing machine starts, as it has been sounding like this. All right, so what that tells me is I believe I have a bad bearing on the bottom of my washing machine down here, and I'm gonna need to replace that. And so that's what we're gonna be doing today. And so I'm gonna be walking you through the process on replacing the main bearing on your Maytag Bravos XL. This also applies for a handful of other related models that hopefully I'll be able to put at least some of those in the description down below. All right, so now let's get started. One of the obvious things you're going to need is a replacement set of bearings. So I picked up this kit from Octopus Bearings on Amazon. I'll put a link below. And from what I could tell, one of the things I was looking for in a kit was a kit that included all the special tools that are needed, because there was going to be a couple of them. And I wanted a replacement spindle, which is this part here. This is what the tub rests on and why you have to use a car jack to remove the tub. This kit here also includes grease, labeled, if you can see that there on camera, it's just a white tube that says grease. We also have Fix All adhesive, the original super glue. We have a seal, a bearing, and another bearing. We also have some of these specialty tools that we're going to need to press in the bearing. Again, this is why I bought this kit here, because it came with all the specialty tools I needed to be able to press it in and seat the bearing. This was about maybe $70, give or take. Another piece of pipe and more specialty tools. You can see this has a welded nut on the end. And this even comes with an instruction sheet on how to do the process. So I thought that this was a good kit to buy for the money. It was well reviewed on Amazon, so I thought I'd give it a shot. I'm not sponsored by Octopus Bearings, but I do have to say that that's a really cool name for a bearing company. I think it's actually pretty slick for their branding on that. I could not actually find a so-called OEM kit from Whirlpool or Maytag officially for this that contained all the parts, and so I went looking and this is what I came up with. We're going to need some other tools in addition to this to be able to get started on this. The tools you're going to need for this job, separate from removing the tub that I showed in the other video, again check that link down below for that, are going to be as follows. Some more paper towels and Q-tips. You particularly may want the Q-tips and the extra paper towels, and obviously a trash bag to dispose of them, to deal with any grease that may have blown out of a bearing. My bearing blew out completely and got grease everywhere. And then I found this Clorox Sentiva spray worked really well for cleaning it off a tile floor. And so I thought that worked really well. You're also probably going to want a lantern or a flashlight or something else that will get light into the right place. I use this cobalt lantern in this case. Pick a flashlight of your variety, but you may want something to help you see some of the various fasteners and nooks and crannies. And then as far as the actual tools that are going to go, let's start here from the back. You're going to want a hammer to be able to help knock the drive shaft out. You're going to need a 3/8 ratchet. You also need a 1/4-inch ratchet that you should already have, that you'll need to remove the drum. And I'm going to use a flex head ratchet here. I think that'll help get around a couple of obstructions pretty well. And then I'm going to have a pair of vice grips. Now, in my opinion, you want a pair of vice grips that have a bend in the jaw, because this is going to need to go around a spline drive shaft, and having a pair of vice grips that have a cutout will help you get on different sides of that drive shaft and give you a little bit of a better grip when it comes to needing to turn that separate while, oh, that fell, while also using a 1.25-inch wrench. If you don't have one of these big 1.25-inch wrenches, you can probably get away with an 1.25-inch set of adjustable, or a If you don't have one of these big 1¼ inch wrenches, you can use an adjustable wrench or a crescent wrench, as long as it goes up to an 1¼ inch in size. And then now for the business end of this 3/8 ratchet, you're going to want a 1/4 inch hex socket. There's a fastener on the bottom that you're going to need to remove with that. You're also going to need a 15/16 deep well socket. The important thing is that it is deep well. Alternative, if you don't have them 3/8, you can also do that in 1/2 inch and obviously substitute a 1/2 inch ratchet. And then to go with the 1/4 inch ratchet that you already have for removing the drum is going to be a 3/8 deep well socket, or you could use a short socket here and then use that with a short extension, would also work instead of that. And then in the event that you find particularly the bottom nut on the drive shaft difficult, you may want some penetrating oil. We'll use some Super Freeze Off from CRC Automotive. You can find this at an auto parts store. I think this is a fabulous penetrating oil that works great for being able to break loose, stubborn fasteners. You may find that due to water and corrosion that you may have some issues on the bottom side of your washing machine. And then the other bit here that's not really shown here is you may want some padding for your floor, and you're going to need some arm strength because you're going to have to flip the washing machine from being vertical to on its side multiple times as you go back and forth through this process. It's a little bit annoying how many times you have to go from the top to the bottom and back and forth, so you may want to put a moving blanket on your floor to protect it, and you're going to need to have the arm strength to be able to lift and tip it safely. So you may need a friend to help you out with that depending upon your level of strength. And now for time, you probably need about 6 hours, give or take, plus an overnight. There's one step in the sealing process that you need to let set for a few hours, and you really can't use your washing machine generally until after you've slept, and to make sure everything is all sealed up properly. And so give yourself a decent time. This is a good weekend project. You know that if you start this on a Saturday, you can have it done by Sunday and be back in business for the rest of the week. This is a little, I would probably rate this an intermediate level project. It's not the easiest thing to do. Just stay focused and it will not be that difficult. In my opinion, the most difficult part of this process is just the patience required to have to go from tipping the washing machine from being upright on its side, back and forth, and then all of the time cleaning. That the cleaning to me is probably the most obnoxious part of this, and that if your bearing did spew a bunch of grease everywhere, you'll need to do a lot of cleaning to make sure that grease doesn't work its way into your clothing. But otherwise, it's very doable. And the tools aren't too extravagant, and the other specialty tools are already included in an Octopus Bearing Kit. So you're all set to go with that kit. Now, let's get started and get on to business. Quick extra tip, because you're going to have to remove the hoses completely from the back side of this. Make sure you've got a bucket that you can drain your hoses into for your hot and your cold water, and to try to get as much of your discharge out as well, because you will have to tip this machine over on its side to get to the bearing at the bottom. So make sure you've got a towel and you've got a cloth for your floor to be able to catch the water so you're not making a mess everywhere. With all the tools in hand, the first thing we're going to need to do is obviously to unplug and disconnect the washing machine, and then we're also going to have to remove the top here and remove the tub. I've got another video about how to do that. That's on a video entitled How to Clean Your Washing Machine. I'll put a card up here in the corner, here hopefully, about that exact process. Based on other comments I've received from that video, one of the things that I cannot stress enough is you need to use the car jack on the 2x4 to be able to remove the drum. That don't try to skip that step to try to save yourself some time, because you will not be able to save time. As I pull this out further, you can very clearly see a donut-shaped splattering of grease on my floor that I'm going to have to obviously clean with my mop as part of this project. That also tells me even further that it is definitely a blown bearing with that very distinctive grease pattern, and even has a very distinctive spin cycle to it for the angle that the grease has been thrown off to the side. I'm probably gonna have to remove my dryer as well to make sure I clean underneath the dryer. Once you have the drum out, this is where the process begins to go a little bit different. The first thing I should point out, you don't have to remove the drain cover from back there, but at this point, why would you not? It's just 2 screws, remove it, clean it, And then I'll end up putting it back when I'm done later, but there's no reason not to clean that out while this is all apart, but technically you don't have to. So at this point, now that my drum's out, the next thing I need to do is to be able to lay this down backwards, which means my hose has to already be disconnected off the rear end so I can get to the bottom side of the washing machine. As we look at the bottom side of the machine, we can see there's definitely much of brown gunk all around here, and then around the pumps at the bottom and around this interior skirt. So you can see where it's definitely sprayed. And then based on the rotation of the motor, that has caused this to kind of spread that grease pattern that you saw when I moved it out earlier. So we're going to have to clean it up before we're all done, but we've got a lot more replacement to do, so I'm not going to start my final cleaning until I dig a little deeper. So now I'm going to use a 1/4-inch hex bit on the end of a ratchet to be able to remove the lock here. There we go. We'll set that aside. And now we should be able to get access and I'm just going to continue to wiggle this off. There we go. And now we can see how dirty that is. And we can see we're definitely getting closer to the source. And now we can see our stator down here. And we can see how badly blown this is here. And now here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that we're going to have to remove. These bolts should be about 3/8 of an inch. This is what's going to hold on your stator. And then this little plate here will come out too. You can see just how dirty and gunky this is. It even feels greasy to the touch. So I know I'm getting to the source of my problem. Now I should be able to remove my stator. I'll be very careful with those wires in terms of where you set them, that we don't want to damage the stator. That's a very integral part of our washing machine. And now we can see we have our shaft here, and there is so much wiggle there. It is very clear that that is the problem with that bearing right there that has gone. So we're going to need to continue now to pull that apart. And we can also remove this gray shroud as well. We'll set that aside. So now we've got clear, unobstructed access to our parts that we need. And now the next step is to remove the shaft here from the lower shaft nut. Now to do this here, I'm going to use a pair of vice grips and a 1¼ wrench. I'm going to stick the 1¼ wrench around the shaft nut, and then I'm going to use my vice grips to turn this now. Because this did come with a new shaft, I'm not terribly worried about stripping off this shaft, but I'm going to at least try not to damage it worse than I have to, because it'll be good practice for whenever I go to put on the new one to know what works, and just in case there's any problem with that one. Seeing as I'm having considerable trouble breaking that free, I'm going to go grab some penetrating oil to squirt that down with. So for a penetrating oil today, I'm going to be using Freeze Off. In my opinion, this is one of the best penetrating oils that you can find. I've got another video all about that. I'll try to put a card up in the corner about some testing on this Freeze Off. Now it looks like we got that nut broken free there. Now that the nut's off, I'm going to use a hammer and give this a couple taps to hopefully knock out this shaft. There we go. You can see that's through. I'll be able to remove that from the other side. Obviously, we still got the bearings here. We're going to have to pop that out from the reverse direction. Now I'm going to retrieve the drive shaft from inside. I have no idea what you can see there, but there we go. Out came the drive shaft. With the drive shaft popped out, the next thing we needed to do is to remove this bottom bearing, and there's also a washer and a sleeve in there, but there's a little lip on the inside, and so we're going to use this straight shaft tool that's provided in the Octopus Bearing Kit, and we'll put it at an angle to try to get to the inner edge of this bearing in here. I can hear how my bearing is grinding. Then we're going to tap that out with a hammer. It's kind of a pain to try to do this from above because really you're working deep inside the tub. So you might want to have a longer hammer would be ideal. I'm not sure I've got a longer hammer, so I'm just going to try to use a normal hammer, and I'll see how best I can show you that on camera. I'm going to try as best as I can to see if I can make any progress before I get out the hammer. This is where it's a little bit of a pain to do because you need to be able to drive it down and hammer sideways, and you've only got so much space with your body to do this. After a fair bit of hammering, here's what popped out. Here is a sleeve. And we also have the bearing. This one's all full of crud from the grease it's been spewing. And the spacer that popped out. Those are all going to be headed straight for the trash can. And now we're going to use a paper towel and we're going to clean up inside of there. We're going to need to give some more cleaning here in a little bit, but we've got one more bearing to remove, and that's our top bearing. And we can pop that top bearing out using that same tool. We're going to hammer the other direction now. I'm just going to put in the rod here until it catches on the bearing. And thud, the other bearing is out. Here is what my top bearing looks like. The top bearing is the bigger of the two bearings. This has a bunch of sludge on it. Now the next step, since we got all of our parts out, is to begin our reassembly process. But that's going to start by cleaning up that hole there. As part of the cleaning process, you may want to use a toothpick to make sure you get all the gunk out, or other pick to try to make sure that these surfaces are all nice and as free of debris as possible, so you can get a nice, positive, and importantly, square seating for your new bearing and shaft assembly. You don't want any old debris to get in the way that's going to cause it not to sit square and flush, because all that's going to do is create extra wear on the bearing and cause a problem more quickly into the future, which we obviously don't want, because that's the whole point of doing this project, is to fix a bad bearing. After you get the rest of the passageway as clean as you can, you're going to flip the washing machine back upright. I know it's a lot of back and forth. And then now there's a weep hole in the spot for the upper bearing that we're going to use a toothpick like this that we're going to clean up. It's about halfway down. You can see where my toothpick is sitting there. That is marking the hole. So it's about 45 degrees off to the right. It follows almost a line or one of the ribbing in the tub. That is likely where the grease escaped whenever it blew the bearing in the first place. And then once we have that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our upper bearing, which is the larger of the two bearings as provided. So just for the record, the bearings in the kit are marked as 6006RS. And these should be able to go either way into the receptacle down here. So we're just going to press this right down like that. Just a quick little press fit is all that needs. Remember, you might still have a little bit of water in there. I've got some more tub cleaning I want to do whenever I'm actually done with this repair. I'm just trying to manage the parts that I can with the floor space that I've got at the moment. So now it's going to be time for me to get ready for the bottom parts. Once you've got the bearing seated, then you're going to want to look through your kit, and there's going to be two of these bearing race drivers. One is slightly larger and the other one is slightly smaller on the inside diameter. And this is going to go through the top bearing. And so you want to make sure you choose the correct one that has the best fit for the bearing. I would recommend that you try to fit both of them, one to each of them, before you start this. And so we're just going to drop this right down. And that's going to sit on there. This, of course, will come out. And then now we're going to take the threaded rod and the little angle arm, if you will. We're going to try to tighten this nut up here as tight as we can to the, or against the other arm. And then this arm is going to drop down into the lower part of the drainage well. Just like that. You can see where that's going to give us a little bit of a pressure to be able to turn against, to be able to help seat the bearing all the way in whenever we put in the lower bearing. Of course, there's going to be a seal that we're going to put back on top of this whenever we get a little farther down the process, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. And now we got to put the washer back on the ground again to get to the bottom. Now with the washing machine flipped again on its backside, we can see the press rod coming through. Now we're going to start feeding some parts through. We've got a spacer tube that we're going to push on. Make sure you don't push too hard on that rod. We don't want to push that rod back through. We want to use it. Then we've got a spacer washer. This is the larger, skinnier washer. That's going to go on top of our bearing. We're going to set that on there too. Go at the bottom of our spacer tube. And then we're going to use our lower bearing. And again, this one can go either way. And that should seat something like this close to the center. And then we've got our bearing driver. You can see there's a recessed portion here that's going to go around the outside of the bearing. So we're going to put that on like this. And now this kit comes with a washer. I'm going to put that on there. And then we've got a bolt. And now we have to turn the bolt to be able to seat our parts. And now to tighten everything down, I'm going to use a 15/16 deep well socket on a ratchet. If you had a 15/16 wrench, that would work. Or you could use a adjustable wrench as well. One last detail after you're done with this that you'll notice, first of all, you want to double check this is as uniform as you can get all the way around. Your bearing press tool should have ensured that for you. But you'll notice that the bearing does sit just proud of the surface. That's okay. That's the way that it was when you took off the old bearing, and that is how this is designed. Yeah, so now go ahead and flip your washing machine back up, and we're going to remove the press tool from the top and work on some more components from up above. And now back up on top, we're going to reach down and pull out our tool. Make sure we also get the upper bearing press too. That comes out like that. And then now we're going to take the drive shaft and we're going to put the silver collar end down, where that should be resting against the top of the bearing. Now there's a good chance this won't actually be able to drop straight down. We're going to have to tap it into place. It should be a pretty firm fit by the time we're done. If you can feel on this shaft here, there's a little small lip around the edge that is probably going to be our biggest holdup for getting around the bearing. So we're going to have to tap this down. The kit includes this white plastic tube that we can put around that should catch perfectly on there. And then if I use a 2x4 and a hammer, I should be able to give that a few taps. There we go, and that drops right down, just like that. And if that's not all the way down, we'll be able to get it the rest of the way whenever we seat the bottom end components and get the stator and the rotor put back together. And now with the washing machine back down again, I've got the large lower shaft nut. Again, we're using the new parts and we're going to thread this on here. And now to tighten it up, I'm going to use my 1¼ wrench and a pair of vice grips. Now I'm going to be very careful I don't strip out and damage the spline drive end here as I try to get this tightened up. Just get it good and tight. You'll probably feel a good place where it'll stop. You need the shaft to still obviously spin. You can double check your work on top to make sure that the top of the drive shaft got fully seated with the bottom of the collar getting all the way down against that top bearing. There's probably going to be about 1 thread, give or take here, around by the time you get that properly seated on the top. You can go back and forth and double check if you have any doubts.
And now we're going to take the top shroud for the stator and we're going to try to line it up here. It's going to take a little bit of plane to line up with the ridges here on the bottom of the wash tub. It might take a couple fits or two, but you can look for relative position to how that lines up with the rotor, or I'm sorry, with the wiring for the stator. Go ahead and press fit that into place. It's also a good idea that we also have the screws to hold that stator on nearby, because in a second here we're going to click this in like this. Now we're going to grab our stator assembly and think about which way those wires are going, so then we can lift that up into place, being very careful to route the wires. Then we're going to place this around the drive shaft here. Be careful that that shroud doesn't shift on you. Line up the screw holes here. Make sure you've got those bolts handy, or at least within arm's reach that you can press fit those yourself. Here we're going to get this lined up here. It's going to take a little bit of back and forth playing here to get this lined up here and to be able to get the bolts to be able to drop right in, so we can line it up here. And once we get the bolts in, it'll hold itself in place and square itself up here. So don't stress too much. Just to get it pretty close, and the bolts will take care of the rest for you. Now that all the holes are in alignment, there's a spacer we're going to put in place here. Line up the screw holes on that. Again, once we get the screws out here in just a second, they're all lined up. You can start just by simply trying to hand thread the screws in. That'll hold the alignment at least close enough on this until you can get your wrench on here to be able to tighten it up fully. Just seat a couple here and then work your way around and you'll be back in business. And now we're going to find that tube of sealant here. This is the tube that looks like this. We're going to unscrew the cap, and if you look under the cap, there's a little bit of a little spike. Turn it upside down. That'll puncture the tip there. You'll probably want a paper towel nearby just for some cleanliness. Or put just an itty-bitty small dab here. I'm putting just maybe a hair too much more than I should have. That I'll have to wipe this off here. We need just a touch to be able to have just a little itty-bitty dab to be able to help hold on the bottom cover over the stator and rotor here. So wipe it back off with the paper towel here. And then now we're going to get the cover. Now just one more dab for a good measure. We'll get the cover here. Make sure you pay attention to get this lined up correctly, because that magnet will grab this pretty tightly and pull this into position. We do have that little dab of sealant here at the bottom just to make sure it holds on. You also want to make sure you've cleaned this off and got out any residual grease. I didn't show that on camera here, but there is a fair bit of elbow work going into cleaning this up here. Line this up with the shaft here. And then in just a second here, it'll snap basically right into position. Now you're going to want to find that special nut that goes on the bottom here. This is going to take your 1/4 inch hex socket here. You can start it in by hand. This is going to firmly secure this the rest of the way in place. So go ahead and hand tighten that down. Obviously it spins just a little bit here. Get out the ratchet, and then we will tighten this bolt into place. Just good and tight is enough. Double check that everything spins correctly. You don't want to find out later that something is bound somewhere else, or you got a wire that's caught that's rubbing. Make sure your wires are nice and cleanly laid out underneath. You don't want any rubbing at all on those wires, otherwise you'll be in for a really bad day. Here we go with that 1/4" bit. Stick it right in here, a couple turns, and now we'll be done here in just a moment on the bottom. And then we'll flip it back up one last time, and then everything else will be completed from the top side of the washer.
And now with the machine back upright, our last step to finish the process here is going to be to install the top main seal around the drive shaft. So if we look at the top main seal, mine came in a little bag. One thing that we'll notice is there's a little metal spring along the bottom side of this. And so that's going to be one thing we want to make sure we pay attention to. That's going to help provide tension around the bottom of the seal. And then remember, our kit also came with grease. We're going to pack the inside of this seal with grease. There's basically an upper channel, it's a little bit wider, and a lower channel, it's a little bit smaller. We're going to pack both of those grooves with grease. And then we're going to use the adhesive to go around the outside to help provide a good solid seal around the outside of this. So we're going to get our hands a little dirty here, getting this all lubed up and prepped and ready to go. And then we'll drop this down onto the drive shaft. We will also be using the plastic tube that came with it. And you'll notice how this tube fits around the top of the seal here. We're going to want to make sure we get this pressed in evenly, just so we don't end up having anything off center. Now for the packing process, we're going to take our grease tube, which Octopus Bearing very ever so ingeniously called it just grease. I mean, that's all we really need. We don't need this to be too fancy. You may want to put on gloves. I'm going to do this barehanded for better or for worse. And then I want to make sure I get the grease all the way around. That looks like we're pretty good. And now I'm going to make sure on the outside here, I'm going to wipe down the outside to make sure the outside does not have any grease on it. Because on the outside is what is going to get our adhesive. I might have to do a little bit more grease spreading here, just to make sure we don't have any major clumps. Should be good. And now that we're done with the grease, now we're going to put the adhesive around the outside of the seal. That should be good for now. We'll seal that up, and now we'll take this over to the machine. And then now, so that the whole side goes down, we're going to just press this down into and around the shaft. Then now we're going to use our tube. A hammer and a 2x4. Make sure that our press is sealed, our tube is sealed as well as it's centered around the seal as best as we can. There we go. That is now just below the top. Then we use a little more of the adhesive, and I go around the outside edge of this to make sure that this is fully sealed around the outside edge of the seal. Make sure I can turn the shaft. Now after you've got that nice bead of sealant on there, if you're able to, you can go ahead and let this sit overnight. I know not everyone's going to have that ability, but you're definitely going to want to let that fully cure, again, about overnight. before you actually run any water through here, so it's fully dry and sealed. So in the meantime, there's a couple things that we can do. So now the next thing I'm going to do is replace my drain filter that I've already cleaned and had drying. I'll put that down. And then I'm also going to clean up the grease spill on my floor, so everything will be all ready for this to go in the morning for replacing the rest of the tub. Otherwise, from here on out, everything else is just the same as if you're replacing the tub that you would have seen on my other video, because from the next thing you're going to do after you get the drain filter on is you would then reseat the tub, and then you'd put the rest of the attachments that hold the tub down on the shaft. And that's it. So the biggest issue here is just the amount of time it's going to take you to clean up the mess, to be able to clean up your machine and the parts. And the other thing is just the amount of time and the space required to lay everything out, to take the machine, lay it down, flip it back up, lay it down, flip it back up, so on and so forth. And so if you have access to the backside of your dryer while you're doing this, you might as well grab your vacuum and vacuum behind your dryer, just to make sure there's no extra lint back there, so you don't have any extra fire hazards that you don't need in your house. And with that, you'll be back on your way. Found this video useful and interesting, give it a thumbs up. Any other questions or comments, put it down below. And I look forward to seeing you back here in another video. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.